Welcome to By Then I Knew, and thank you for watching our newest original story. Nobody would have called the life of Emily Wilson and her husband Gregory interesting, and nobody would have written a book about their slow, ordinary romance that ended with a quick wedding at the county clerk's office. Because there was nothing thrilling about it. What could an author possibly tell? How pharmacist Gregory Wilson met librarian Emily Carter at a cactus lovers club. How they argued over whether the rare cactus called the fire dragon would ever bloom, and then got married, exchanging the cheapest wedding bands they could scrape together the money to buy. Who would care about that? But, as people say, trouble only needs a beginning. Emily and Gregory had no idea that the strangest and most unbelievable part of their lives still lay ahead. When the police officer questioned their friends and neighbors, every single person said the same thing. The couple had been ideal, almost exemplary. They were modest, polite people who never made noise. In short, the Wilsons' apartment had always been quiet and peaceful, with no scandals, no shouting, and none of the fighting that went on in so many other families in the building. They just never had children, sighed Annie, Emily's neighbor, and at the same time her friend. They live modestly. Even though Greg recently opened a small chain of pharmacies, all their money goes back into the business. Emily even borrows money from me sometimes. She says Gregory is working hard, but they just can't seem to get ahead. The investigator wrote Annie's words into the report, except for the part about Emily's childlessness, since he did not see a crime in that. The case concerning the strange death of Gregory Wilson was closed, and all suspicion was removed from his widow. What happened was this. Emily's husband, a pharmacist and collector of rare cacti, died after choking on a fishbone during a celebration dinner at a restaurant. He and Emily had been marking 10 years of marriage. A doctor who happened to be dining there could not reach the choking man in time, and the paramedics could not save him either. The poor pharmacist died right in front of his wife, which only made her grief more unbearable. While Emily collapsed into hysterics, Gregory's body, dressed in a new suit, was taken to the morgue and later handed over to the funeral home. Annie helped Emily prepare for the funeral of her suddenly deceased husband, including with money, because the poor widow had no close family. "I'll pay you back every cent," Emily said through tears. "We're friends. We'll settle it later." Annie waved her off, then nervously knocked her knuckles against the nearest wooden doorframe because she was terribly superstitious and terrified of losing her own husband. A butcher who made decent money at the market. Just imagine. So young and already a widow. Annie knocked on the wood again, and the gesture made Emily wince. It made her grief feel heavier. Deep in her heart, envy stirred toward Annie, that mother of many children who was always complaining either about her kids' mischief or the endless laundry and cooking. Emily would have been glad to be in her place, but fate, as it often does, had made its own decision. Now, standing at the cemetery at the very edge of the grave, Emily sobbed and thought, why all this suffering? Is this even real? How am I supposed to survive loneliness before I'm even 32, with the status of a widow? Someone shouted, pointing at her, hold her, or she'll fall right into the grave from grief. Look how slippery this clay is. 2 pairs of hands grabbed the grieving widow and carefully pulled her away from the edge. Emily obeyed, clutching a small bouquet of white carnations in her hand. She did not resist or argue, because all she could feel was the crushing pain of losing the man she had loved for 10 years. The rain poured with such determination that it seemed nature itself had decided to wash away not only the sins of the deceased before his final rest, but also the little sins of those who had come to see him off. Rainwater streamed over umbrellas, down people's faces, over marble headstones, turning the ground into sticky mud. Even the pastor's mournful words sounded watered down and insincere, especially coming from people who had barely known the late Gregory, but pretended they had been his friends. Emily stood beside the casket and felt as if the whole thing, the funeral, the crowd, and the false grief of his colleagues, was not truly happening to her. It was as if she were the main character in some dark French comedy, wearing an equally dark dress and a drenched little black veil, surrounded by bad actors. She had the feeling that at any moment someone would shout, "Cut!" and everyone would calmly go take a coffee break. But nobody shouted. even though she kept waiting for it, hoping the word might dull the pain and switch off the frightening reality around her. Instead, a former business partner of her husband's, a man named Martin Keller, began delivering a sympathetic speech about what a bright and honest person Gregory had been. He was honest to the core, Keller proclaimed as rain trickled generously down his collar. Gregory was the soul of every gathering. You all know what he was like. Emily half listened to this almost stranger, a man her husband had mentioned only once or twice. She had known her husband for more than 10 years. Honest to the core? Emily gave a bitter little smile at such a blatant lie. Most likely, Keller knew perfectly well that Gregory had managed to avoid taxes so skillfully that even the slickest con artist would have envied him. Gregory, the soul of every gathering? The same Gregory who sat in the corner during New Year's company parties, buried in his phone, and could not stand having guests over. Something was wrong here. Exactly what was wrong became clear a few minutes later, when Keller finished his speech and came up to Emily. "If you decide to sell your husband's business, come to me first," he whispered. "I'll buy it at a fair price. You won't be able to handle it anyway. My husband hasn't even been buried yet, and you're thinking about money," Emily answered, turning away from him. "Business is business," Keller said. Then he slipped unnoticed out of the crowd, climbed into his luxury import, and drove away. Emily watched him go, her gaze sliding over the people around her. There were about 30 of them. Colleagues, neighbors, a couple of distant relatives, and a few suspicious-looking men in tight leather jackets who looked more like criminals than mourners. That was when Emily saw him, the strange man. Her eyes met his cold, calm stare, and a nasty shiver ran down her back. That always happened when Emily had a bad feeling. About 150 feet from the grave, beneath an old crooked maple tree, stood a tall, thin man. The stranger did not approach the casket, did not bow his head, and did not put on a sorrowful face like everyone else was trying to do. He simply stood with his hands in the pockets of a long, old-fashioned coat with a standing collar. He had no umbrella. The rain soaked his old hat, but he seemed not to notice. His eyes, blue as shards of ice, fixed directly on Emily. He looked too calm for such a place and rather strange. He held no flowers. Instead, he carried a thin cane with a silver handle, shaped like a lion's head, which he idly dragged through the wet leaves at his feet. The pastor spoke about the fleeting nature of life and about duty. But Emily was not listening. All her attention had been swallowed by that lonely man, who watched the ceremony with clear interest. Who is he? Emily thought. I know all of Greg's friends, including his business partners, maybe a new colleague, or a new member of the Cactus Club. I haven't been there in a long time, and Gregory went often, though he would have told me about that. How strange. And why is he standing apart? At the very least, it's indecent to stare so openly at someone else's grief. The stranger felt her gaze, or perhaps the doubt and irritation rising inside the widow. Suddenly, he did something that made Emily's eyes widen. He lifted his hat slightly, revealing graying hair, and nodded to her in greeting, as if he knew her personally. The gesture was so old-fashioned that it reminded Emily of the old, black-and-white movies she and her husband used to watch in the evenings over fragrant tea. Soon the ceremony ended, and the casket was lowered into the grave. Clumps of rain-soaked earth began thudding against the lid. Women wailed, men coughed and fell silent. Emily tossed in a handful of dirt and bowed her head, saying goodbye to Gregory without words. When the last clod of earth struck the casket with a dull sound, people began preparing to leave, though most intended first to say a few words to the widow. But Emily, ignoring the rules of decency that demanded she accept everyone's condolences, walked firmly toward the spot where the strange man stood waiting. The crowd parted before her like the sea before Moses, watching in surprise as she marched away. A few people tried to speak to her, to offer sympathy again, but Emily pushed through, letting their empty phrases pass right by her ears. She instinctively felt that it was vitally necessary to approach this strange man, who still stood in the rain without moving. Her black velvet shoes sank into the wet earth, threatening to stay there altogether. The wind blew cruelly into her face, wet with tears and rain, trying to tear the black lace veil from her head. "Who are you?" Emily asked directly when she reached him. "I'm Gregory Wilson's widow. Did you know him?" Forgive me, but I don't remember you." Raindrops ran down her face, but Emily had no concern for such small things. The man smiled, and the smile seemed to Emily both sad and patronizing, like a grandfather watching the mischief of his grandchildren. "Did I know Gregory Wilson?" the stranger repeated in a hoarse, deep voice, lifting one eyebrow. "I suppose I did, quite well even, better than anyone present at this sorrowful gathering. Except for you, Emily, of course." "You know me? But from where? Answer me," Emily cried impatiently, and her heart clenched with a dark premonition. The stranger took his hands from his pockets and handed Emily a business card, which immediately grew wet in the rain. Emily stared at the letters, wiping drops from the card again and again. "Don't bother. I'll tell you myself," the stranger said in that velvet baritone. For some reason, his voice calmed her. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Leo Griffin. I'm a private detective." Emily flinched at those words, and the fingers holding the card began to tremble. Why was a detective here? The thought flashed through her mind. What was he investigating? Was he watching me? But why? This can't be good. "I don't understand," she said, stammering from either shock or cold. "My husband was a good man." Griffin interrupted her, looking straight into her eyes and holding her by the hand. "Your husband, Emily, turned out to be a unique man. Few people manage to combine the incompatible. Being an exemplary family man, owning a chain of small pharmacies, and at the same time running a second secret business in the heart of the city. You're mistaken. My husband was a pharmacist, a simple pharmacist. Until the last second, Emily hoped Griffin was wrong. Well, yes, a pharmacist," Griffin answered, trying to speak as gently as possible because he saw how pale she had become, but not a simple one. 4 pharmacies, with clean annual profit of about $75,000. And right near one of them, an establishment called the Fire Dragon, which brought your late husband about $1.2 million a year after expenses. At the mention of her husband's favorite cactus, the Fire Dragon, the plant he had treasured more than anything, Emily flinched and squeezed her eyes shut, as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over her. She went limp and swayed. The white carnations she had been clutching fell with a soft thud into the mud. With a quick movement, Griffin caught her by the elbow. "Hold on, Mom. What are you doing? I understand this is a shock, but unfortunately, it's only the beginning of the problem." "The beginning of what problem?" Emily breathed, looking at him in fear. "What does that mean, Mr. Griffin?" Griffin bent quickly and picked up the flowers, shaking the mud from them so neatly it was as if he did that every day. He handed the bouquet back to Emily and took her by the elbow. "It means, my dear Emily, that your husband was not merely a pharmacist. He made a much bigger mistake. He borrowed a very large sum from very serious, and I would even say dangerous, people. $2 million, to be exact. $2.4 million if we're counting every last green bill." Emily was silent at first. Then she burst into hysterical laughter, so loudly that several of Gregory's acquaintances, still lingering near the grave, turned around in confusion. They wanted to approach the widow, but Griffin raised one hand in a gesture that meant everything was all right. "Almost $2.5 million? Gregory borrowed that? We never had even $1,000 in foreign cash in our lives. We counted pennies. I borrowed money from my neighbor for new curtains. My husband told me I couldn't have a winter coat because there was a crisis, because there was no money, because we had to be patient. I was patient for 10 years, do you understand?" "Of course I understand." Griffin's voice softened. He looked tiredly at the stunned woman, and deep down he pitied her. "But that was a cover story. Your husband deliberately created the image of a poor pharmacist, barely making ends meet." "Then where did the money go?" Emily asked, trying to pull herself together. "To other things." "What things?" She squeezed the bouquet so hard that the stems cracked. Griffin first glanced around, as if checking whether anyone was listening. "I will answer you, Emily, but not here. There are too many people around, and forgive the wordplay, too much water. You and I are soaked through. I suggest we go somewhere warm, clean, and free of unwanted ears. I'll tell you everything in detail, but I warn you, the story will be long, strange, and, in places, even frightening, like a dark fairy tale. Only for now, without a happy ending." "Do dark stories ever have happy endings?" Emily asked bitterly. "That is what detectives are for. to look for those happy endings even where it seems they shouldn't exist. Come on, it's time to show you the truth. Trembling at the thought that she was about to learn something terrible, Emily followed the detective. On the way, she left the muddy carnations on the fresh mound of earth, almost entirely covered with wreaths. They walked slowly along the wet asphalt toward the cemetery gates. Griffin held Emily firmly by the elbow, which was fortunate, because after everything she had endured, her legs barely supported her. The rain kept falling without end, deepening the heaviness in the air. Then, Emily suddenly caught herself thinking that her sadness for her husband and her pity had gone somewhere far away, making room for hurt and anger that gave her strength. Now she felt endlessly sorry for herself, not Gregory. She was outraged that for 10 years she had lived under the same roof with a man she trusted, only to discover she had not known him at all, and apparently had not deserved to know his secrets. Don't look back, Emily thought as she and Griffin passed through the gates of that gloomy place. The moment they reached the detective's car, the rain stopped at once, and the sun came out. Her heart grew a little lighter. Emily did not look back once as they drove away from the cemetery. The little cafe called Just For You, located not far from downtown Chicago, was cozy and inviting. You chose a good place for a conversation, Emily said. Exactly what we need. She breathed in the divine mixture of fresh brewed coffee, cinnamon, vanilla, and pastry. I tried, Griffin replied, gesturing toward a table by the window. This will not be an easy conversation, so why not soften it with a hot cappuccino and a couple of croissants? You know that too? Emily asked, embarrassed. Of course, Griffin nodded. I had the curiosity to observe the preferences of the person I was hired to work for. And who hired you, if I may ask? Emily said, studying the modest menu. You did, naturally, Griffin said with a smile, surprising her. At first, of course, Gregory Wilson hired me, and I honestly worked for the money he paid. But now, in light of recent sad events, I've decided you need me as badly as air. All right, I agree to let you help me get out of this nightmare, Emily said, taking a grateful sip of cappuccino. Then listen, Emily, listen carefully. Griffin frowned. He spoke for half an hour, calmly and thoroughly, while Emily listened, growing colder with every word. So, the detective continued, 5 years ago, your husband met a man named David and borrowed those millions from him. He offered this man a simple deal. Money in exchange for a share in his business. David agreed, because he's a risk-taking man with a criminal past, if not a criminal present. Then Gregory opened the business, using his pharmacies as cover. Money started pouring in. Pouring in? Emily exclaimed so loudly that a couple of other customers turned to look at her. We were barely making ends meet. How do you not understand? That was just scenery. The clever man deliberately put on the mask of a poor, honest worker, so everyone would think you had no money, and the neighbors wouldn't envy you or gossip. Smart, isn't it? Smart. Emily was nearly crying from hurt. Her lips trembled. It's vile to lie to your family. I saved on everything I could. He lost piles of money gambling. Yes, he played and very badly, Griffin said. That's why the debt of a little over $2 million is not a bank loan. It's debt to people who do not wait. They don't even care if the debtor dies. Do you understand what I'm saying? Emily froze at his words and gripped the edge of the table. What do you mean? I mean, Emily, that debt is now hanging around your neck like a boulder. Griffin looked at her with sympathy and pity. Legally, you are Gregory's heir now, and you are responsible for his debts only up to the value of the inheritance, an apartment, a car, or whatever else there is. But the criminal world does not obey state law. It has its own rules. There's a collection of rare cacti, Emily answered mechanically. No, the cacti won't help here. Griffin could not hide a small laugh, realizing how naive his companion was. David doesn't need cacti. He needs his millions, and he will take them. The question is by what methods. Men like that don't file lawsuits. Oh my God. Emily covered her mouth with both hands and stared at Griffin with huge, frightened eyes. What do I do? How do I get out of this? Maybe I should go somewhere and hide. They'll find you, Griffin said, waving that away. To begin with, don't panic, because the only place with no way out is the grave. Forgive the harshness. We'll think this through, and don't rush to faint, my dear. I haven't told you everything yet. What could possibly be worse than a huge debt? That is not all. Emily turned pale, waiting for the rest. Griffin fell silent, staring into his cup of tea as if the leaves floating at the bottom fascinated him. Then he took a generous swallow and said all at once, "Gregory had a second family." "My God!" The cup slipped from Emily's hands, and the rest of her coffee spilled across the table. Nesses fell. Even the espresso machine seemed to stop hissing. The barista, standing nearby and involuntarily catching the last few phrases of their conversation, froze with his hand on the machine handle. "Yes, I made inquiries, and this is what I found. May the dead forgive me." Griffin lowered his voice to a whisper, and the espresso machine hissed again, producing another shot. "His mistress is named Megan. She has a 3-year-old son. As you understand, the boy is your husband's child. They live in a new apartment complex near downtown. Naturally, Gregory bought them that little nest. He visited them on Mondays and Thursdays, and rarely on weekends. And he told me he was going to meet suppliers," Emily whispered. She was white as snow. She wiped the coffee puddle with a napkin and could not see her ears. Nausea rose in her throat, and she wanted to cry. It seemed that everything happening around her was unreal, like a scene in a movie. "How can I believe you? Forgive me, but you're a stranger. You come to my husband's funeral and tell me all kinds of things. Maybe this is some terrible prank." Tears ran down Emily's cheeks. "Maybe someone wants to blacken my husband's name, and I believed you. What a fool." "You're not a fool, Emily," Griffin said sadly. He took a thick envelope from the pocket of his coat. "I assumed proof would be necessary. I took the photographs myself. They are not fake." Emily took the envelope and placed it on her lap, not daring to open it. Then, by sheer force of will, she pulled out the first photograph and made herself look. Gregory looked back at her from the picture with a radiant smile she had not seen in years. In his arms, he held a curly-haired toddler with a balloon clutched in his chubby fist. The boy was laughing and looking at his mother, a slender blonde of about 25. The young woman was pretty and leaned trustingly against Gregory's shoulder. The three of them were so happy that Emily's soul turned bitter. With trembling hands, she took out the rest of the photographs and began looking through them. There they were, in a park on a carousel. Then, at the entrance of the new building. And there, choosing toys for the boy in a children's store. Emily lifted her eyes and looked at the detective with such suffering that Griffin's heart shuddered. "The costs of the profession," he thought with a sigh. Out loud, he added, "The boy's name is Peter, a cheerful little fellow." Emily did not understand what was happening to her. She shook with a fine tremor, and it felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. She thought she might faint from the flood of emotions. "This is impossibly vile," she said hoarsely, tearing one of the photos. "Vile." She raised her eyes to Griffin and stared directly at him. Under that dark look, the detective flinched and understood one thing. If he said or did something wrong right now, this woman would tear apart not only the photographs, but him as well. And if that was not enough, she would tear Gregory apart too, even dead. Griffin sprang up, and a minute later he brought the furious Emily a glass of ice water. She drank it in 2 gulps and slammed the glass onto the table so hard it cracked. Griffin grabbed her hand to check whether she had cut herself. There was not a single scratch on her palm. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, surprised. "What?" Emily asked, as if waking from a dream. "You're lucky, it seems." "Lucky? I'm so lucky I want to cry. My husband was the worst kind of bastard, and his mistress lives in an apartment 100 times better than mine." "I agree. It's vile," Griffin nodded. "But I just thought of something, and I see one opportunity in it." "What opportunity?" Emily cried, finally breaking down and giving way to her feelings. "My husband is dead, and on top of that, he was a liar, a debtor, and a womanizer. And you're telling me about opportunities. Cry, go ahead and cry. It will help." Griffin stroked her hair and handed her a handkerchief. "Now listen to what I've come up with. The opportunity is this. The gangsters who are demanding the debt don't know about Gregory's second woman, which means the whole blow will fall on you alone. This Megan and the boy will remain, so to speak, out of it. Do you understand? But we can arrange things so the blow falls on them as well. As the saying goes, let the second widow share not only the joy but also the grief." Emily stopped crying and stared at Griffin with horror-widened eyes. "So that's it? You want to set up a mother and her child? Are you out of your mind, Griffin?" Emily looked at the detective as if he were an enemy. He stepped back, marveling at feminine logic. 1 minute she hated her rival, the next she defended her. Who could understand women? I merely offered you a way to save yourself, to sidestep responsibility, he explained gently, because the people you owe will not hesitate. They will take what is theirs. If there is no money, they will take the apartment. If that isn't enough, they will take more. Do you understand now? Emily was silent. Her head was a complete mess, but she thought feverishly. Her thoughts darted like frightened birds. You just suggested it, and innocent people would suffer. That girl and her son are not guilty of anything. And are you guilty? Griffin asked without blinking. I'm not guilty either. Griffin took another business card from his wallet and placed it in front of Emily. Nobody is guilty except your husband, he said. But the debt will still be collected. How you act is up to you. If you need help, call me and I'll come. For now, I take my leave, but not my goodbye. Griffin left after paying the bill, and Emily remained sitting in the half-empty cafe, thinking that only 3 days earlier she had lived in blissful ignorance, and now she was in hell. For the next week, Emily slept badly, barely ate, and did not leave the apartment. As she locked herself inside and took unpaid leave from the library, only the cacti lifted her spirits a little. She ran a finger along their spines and spoke to them as if they were people. See what your owner did, she said to the fire dragon. Gregory's favorite cactus and his pride. He made a mess, got out of it, in this case, by dying. But the point is the same. I'm the one left holding the end of this whole knot of lies. And there's no way to untangle it. Emily sighed and continued loosening the soil around the prickly favorite. The cactus had long known the truth, because it had been the only friend to whom Gregory could tell everything. The sad silence of the apartment was broken by the doorbell. Emily flinched and dropped the little gardening stick from her weak hands. Well, it's starting, the poor widow thought, trembling with fear. She crept quietly to the door on tiptoe, looked through the peephole, and exhaled in relief. Annie stood there with a basket in her hand. How many people are you inviting for the memorial meal? Her friend announced from the doorway. If it's not many, we can arrange it at the diner. My sister works there as a cook. She'll do it cheaper. Annie shoved the basket into Emily's hands. Here, eat. You're all skin and bone. There are a few meat pies, homemade sausage and cheese. Eat and don't be afraid. I made everything myself. Thank you, Annie. Emily breathed in the smell of the food and realized how hungry she was. So what's your answer? Annie planted her hands on her full hips. What memorial meal? Emily asked, through a mouthful of pie. Have you lost your mind from grief? The remembrance meal. Where are you planning to hold it? Annie stared at her. I only know about the service next month, Emily said, looking at her neighbor in alarm. Annie softened when she saw how lost Emily was and decided to help again. All right then. We'll do it at your place for close friends. You don't have much family as far as I can see. I'll organize it, and you call people. You can pay me back later. You'll owe me. After Annie left, muttering something under her breath, Emily thought, how did it happen that everywhere I turn, I owe someone? The memorial meal passed quietly and quickly. When everyone had gone, Emily cleared the table, chasing away heavy thoughts. She went through Gregory's things and then reached his bookshelves. Among the books, she noticed an unremarkable gray folder with documents. When Emily opened it, she found various lease agreements, bank statements for accounts she had known nothing about, and, among other things, photographs of her husband's other family. A newborn baby, a pregnant Megan, and many pictures of the three of them together. In every picture, they smiled so joyfully and sincerely that it was obvious at once. They had been happy. Griffin was right, Emily said aloud. I shouldn't have insulted the detective. Without regret, Emily gathered her husband's things into large bags and carried them to the dumpsters. Only Gregory's cactus collection remained untouched, led by the fire dragon. Late that evening, when she was getting ready for bed, the phone suddenly rang. Emily reluctantly looked at the screen. The number was not in her contacts. She answered and said tiredly, Hello, I'm listening. If you're a scammer, you're wasting your time. I don't have any money anyway. A quiet laugh sounded on the line, and a velvet male voice with a barely noticeable accent answered, I'm not a scammer, Emily Wilson. Your late husband, however, was. Don't hang up. I need to tell you something. My name is David Morales. Most likely, Emily, you don't know me. The thing is, your husband was foolish enough to die without repaying a serious debt. So we need to meet and settle this question somehow. What do you say?" Although his voice was calm and he spoke politely, Emily's mouth instantly went dry, and her hands began to shake. "Good evening, David." Emily tried with all her strength to calm down and breathe deeply. "Forgive me, David, but my husband never told me anything about a debt, believe me. I don't know what money you're talking about. I don't know what to do." David heard Emily's heavy breathing over the phone and caught the fear in her voice. "Are you feeling sick over there? Don't die on me yet. Everyone's making a habit of it."
What a family.
"If you don't know about the debt, we do. I had a family too, you know. Anyway, come to the Evening Lights restaurant. Alone. If you try to fool me, you'll regret it." Emily clutched the phone and suddenly blurted, "No, let's meet at the Just For You cafe. They have good croissants." Another short laugh came through the line. "You just haven't tried our empanadas," David replied, and his voice softened. "Fine. The cafe it is. I'll wait for you tomorrow at 7 in the evening." "I'll come," Emily said shortly and hung up. Her heart hammered somewhere in her throat, and sweat ran down her back in streams, as if she had just run a marathon in 100-degree heat. "It started," she said. Then she dialed the only person who could help her, Leo Griffin. He answered quickly. "Mr. Griffin, David Morales just contacted me. He suggested we meet," Emily shouted into the phone. Griffin winced and pulled the phone away from his ear. "Don't shout like that. I assumed this would happen. I thought they would come for you sooner, but they let you hold the memorial for the debtor first." "Yes, David has grown sentimental since his wife died. By the way, one of his men called me a week ago and offered cooperation in exchange for a share of your debt, naturally." "And you?" Emily froze, afraid of the answer. "I refused, of course. What did you think?" Now Griffin was the one shouting into the phone. "I told you I work for you, and I keep my word. Thank you. Thank you, dear Mr. Griffin," Emily sobbed. "I'm so grateful." Griffin smiled, accepting the praise. "Incidentally, since we've touched on the matter, my weekly fee is—" "I'll pay whatever you say," Emily interrupted. "What am I supposed to do?" "First, calm down and keep your elf together. That is important," Griffin said in the tone of a strict teacher. "Second, I already have a plan. True, it's a little risky, but that is a minor detail. Also, to carry it out, you will need the help of the late Gregory Wilson's mistress." "What?" "I don't want to see her," Emily grumbled into the phone. "That plan is stupid. She is the mother of his son," Griffin interrupted. "Listen, Megan and Peter also have a right to your husband's inheritance, and therefore they also carry responsibility for his debts. Sooner or later, Morales's people will sniff them out. It's only a matter of time. That means you and she have the same problem. Do you understand where I'm going?" After a short silence, Emily reluctantly asked, "You're suggesting we join forces?" "Yes. It's necessary if you want to survive," Griffin replied. "They say the enemy of my enemy is my friend." In those photographs, she did not look like an enemy. She looked like a victim, same as you, only with a child in her arms. "My God, what kind of hell have I fallen into?" Emily whispered with a heavy sigh. "This isn't hell. This is life," Griffin said philosophically. "And in this life, you were a little unlucky. Your husband turned out to be a swindler and a coward, while you and I are decent people. So let us remain decent. We meet in an hour at the same cafe. Remember, I'll bring Megan." Emily hung up and suddenly felt frightened. She understood why the detective's plan bothered her so much on a subconscious level. She was afraid to meet face-to-face the woman Gregory had perhaps loved more, since he had looked so happy in those photographs. Still, gathering her will into a fist, Emily put on makeup for the first time in 2 weeks, arranged her hair quickly, put on a black dress and a stylish coat, looked at herself in the mirror one last time, and left the apartment. At the cafe, Emily arrived first and took a table in the far corner, away from curious eyes. Trying not to grow nervous while she waited, she studied the menu, which she had almost memorized after 20 minutes. Then the bell over the door jingled, and 2 people entered. Griffin came first, followed by a young woman. Griffin noticed Emily, smiled, and nodded in greeting, just as he had at the funeral. Megan turned pale when she saw Emily and timidly trailed after him, hiding behind his back. Megan turned out to be an ordinary, tear-stained woman with no trace of makeup. Her hair was arranged in a simple braid, almost like a schoolgirl's. She wore a sweatshirt and sweatpants from different sets, with sneakers on her bare feet, which made it clear she was in deep shock. Emily felt awkward in her carefully chosen clothes, with all the sharp phrases she had prepared in advance to throw in the face of her dead husband's mistress. But when she saw Megan's stunned face, the face of a woman who had apparently not fully understood what was happening, all the cruel words stuck in Emily's throat. All she could say was, "Hello, Megan. I'm Greg's widow. Sit down. Let's talk." Megan flinched and looked at Griffin. He nodded, inviting her to sit at the table, then sat down after her. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson," the young woman answered, stammering and fighting shame and fear. "I didn't know Greg was married. Honestly, I swear on my son. Greg said he had divorced years ago. He promised to marry me when I got pregnant, but he kept putting it off. He said he worked in another city and often went away on business trips, and I believed him. What a fool. I'm sorry for little Peter. What am I supposed to tell him? Where's Daddy? I didn't even know he had died." Megan burst into tears and covered her face with her hands. Emily was stunned by her words and did not know what to say. All her anger suddenly vanished, giving way to deep pity for herself, for this young woman, and for her little boy who was waiting for his father. Suddenly, Emily understood that Megan was in an even worse position and was suffering desperately. Emily stood and hugged the young woman around the shoulders. "Don't cry, Megan. I believe you. Greg was good at lying. He strung me along for 10 years. And call me Emily. One way or another, we're friends in misfortune now, and that's almost family. In a hard time like this, we have to stick together." Megan wiped her eyes with the handkerchief Griffin handed her like a true gentleman, then lifted her large, tearful eyes to Emily. "Thank you," she said. "What's going to happen to us? Where are we supposed to get that kind of money?" Griffin straightened and coughed, having expected that question. The women looked at him as if on command. "What do you think I'm here for? As long as I'm with you, nobody will be hurt. Clear?" Griffin looked at the waiter, who had frozen when he overheard that last sentence. "Pour the coffee, friend. We're discussing a game." The waiter nodded sympathetically, set out cups in front of them, and left. "So," Griffin said quietly, "I've come up with a plan." "Again?" Emily exclaimed, glancing meaningfully at Megan. "Calm down. It's a different plan." Griffin smirked and took a large swallow of coffee. "This time my plan is simple and bold. Listen carefully, ladies. I know David is Gregory's only creditor, and at the same time a retired crime boss. That doesn't make things easier. David has one weakness. He cannot pass by valuable antiques. And as I know, the deceased had a collection of old and very rare religious icons, which he secretly gathered from all over the country." "We don't have any icons." "You're mistaken," Emily said. But Griffin raised a hand to stop her from interrupting his thought. "Calm. Only calm," he said. "The icons are in Megan's apartment." Gregory was a clever man, because he knew perfectly well that Morales would come for the debt sooner or later. So he hid them from you, Emily, and from his creditor in the one place nobody would think to look. By the way, those icons are worth far more than the debt, enough even to cover the interest that has piled up. "But I don't know where to look for them," Megan said, frightened. "I can't even imagine. I know every corner of the apartment, every shelf and every closet. I've never seen anything like icons." "Did you look behind the wardrobe?" Griffin smiled. "There is a hiding place there, made according to special plans. The compartment is built into the wall, and it opens simply." Megan threw up her hands. "And I wondered why Greg never let me rearrange the furniture. But behind the wardrobe, there's only an outlet for a radio. And we don't even have a radio. Who designed that hiding place?" "Greg was never handy, as far as I know." "Exactly," Griffin laughed. "I designed the plans for it myself." "So we find these icons, and then what?" Emily asked. "Then we give them to David. But everything has to be arranged so he doesn't learn about Megan and the boy. Otherwise, he'll start demanding the debt from her too. So Megan will lock herself in the apartment and sit there quietly as a mouse. No walks, no shopping trips, nothing while the deal is going on." "Clear." Griffin gave the young woman a stern look. Yes, I understand." Megan nodded quickly, relieved that she would not take part in the dangerous meeting. "Emily and I will go to the meeting with Morales." "What if nothing works?" Megan blinked her big frightened eyes. Then we're in trouble up to our necks, Griffin said, spreading his hands. But I still believe in luck, and I'm used to risk. It comes with the job. All the next day, Emily prepared for the important meeting on which her entire life depended. And, of course, like every woman on the planet, she was tormented by the eternal question, what should she wear? She opened her closet doors and studied her clothes for a long time, until she chose a black velvet dress trimmed with handmade lace. She'd so pulled out black pointed heels with a graceful heel, which she had saved for special occasions, and a strict fitted coat. The look was completed with a modest string of pearls that rested delicately against her thin neck. On the way, she stopped at a salon to have her hair and makeup done. "What would you like?" the stylist asked, looking questioningly at the pale woman with dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. "I'm going to settle an important matter. Help me," Emily answered pitifully. The stylist tilted her head to the side, as if deciding what could be sculpted from such an unpromising lump of clay, and then delivered her verdict. "Trust me, honey, I'll make you pure grace." 2 hours later, Emily looked at herself in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back. Could she truly be this beautiful? Her skin looked cared for and healthy, glowing with youth again. Light, subtle makeup emphasized the fine shape of her face, the expression in her eyes, and the velvet softness of her lashes. Her hair was beyond praise. Pale blonde curls had been arranged into a luxurious knot, framing her face in soft waves. "Well, would you look at that?" "Thank you." Emily was pleased with herself, and for the first time she felt like a confident, beautiful woman. "Come back to us again," the stylist said with a smile, "and love yourself. Good luck." Strangely, all the fear Emily had been living with for several days vanished somewhere, and she walked toward her fate with steady steps. When she entered the cafe, she saw Griffin, who had also dressed up in a business suit, and David Morales, a tall man of about 38 with perfectly styled hair, black as a raven's wing and already threaded with gray. His brown eyes were heavy, penetrating, and, as Emily thought, sad. David wore an expensive, perfectly tailored suit and equally expensive shoes. On his wrist gleamed a watch that cost as much as a pair of country houses. It was obvious that Morales was not used to ordinary places. He preferred luxurious restaurants with golden chandeliers, heavy drapes, and waiters in tuxedos who looked like important penguins. Here, in his designer clothing and rich man's habits, he seemed uncomfortable. Emily recognized Griffin at once, but he did not immediately recognize her. When she approached the table and politely greeted the men, Griffin's mouth opened in astonishment. David stood and offered her a chair, taking her in with an amazed, searching look. "Now everyone is here," he said, and Emily noticed that Morales had a pleasant baritone. "I didn't think you would be so." "So what?" Emily asked, smiling softly. "Beautiful." "And brave," David answered with a smile. He picked up the menu upside down and did not even notice. "Caught," Griffin thought joyfully, looking at Emily with admiration. "Smart woman," she prepared. And the smart woman, it seemed, had been caught herself because she blushed scarlet at the sight of David. "Why is this gangster so charming? What does he want?" she thought, lowering her eyes. "Is this a trap? Could the widow of such an unworthy man really be such an enchanting woman? What is happening here? Is she a witch?" David thought at the same moment, furrowing his brows for effect, though he wanted to smile and hold this witch by the hand and never let go. Griffin saw that something incomprehensible was happening, something outside his calculations. He practically froze, not knowing what to do. David looked at Emily with curiosity. "You're a beautiful woman and already a widow. I understand you, but you must understand me too. I'm a businessman, and I have to take what is mine. Where is the money?" Emily took a deep breath and blurted, "There is no money, David. But there are icons in gilded frames. They are 3 centuries old. They're worth more than my husband's debt. I know you understand art, especially rare pieces. I am offering you antique icons made by old masters. You are a powerful man. I'm an ordinary woman, and it is dangerous for me to keep them." "Well then, show me." David was afraid of being disappointed in the woman he liked. Too many liars had crossed his path before. Griffin brought a large bundle from the car and placed it on the table. In complete silence, Morales unwrapped the canvas and spent a long time examining the icons with reverence, carefully turning them in his hands. Then he looked at Emily. Where did you get them? Just don't tell me you stole them." David fixed an eagle-eyed stare on her. Emily did not look away. She struck the table with her small fist and said firmly, "They are my husband's collection. He spent his whole life collecting them. And cacti, too." David froze for a couple of seconds, then burst into such loud laughter that other customers in the cafe began turning toward their table. "Well, aren't you fierce? You've killed me." A fist on the table, cacti. Emily and Griffin exchanged glances. They were in no mood to laugh. They were waiting for the verdict from an authority like Morales. "I envy that Wilson," David said once he had calmed a little. The clever bastard had good taste. Whether he meant the icons lying before him, Emily, or both, he did not specify. "So is the debt closed?" Griffin asked, aching for an answer. "Closed," David said, looking at Emily. "Completely. But there is a nuance." "What nuance?" Griffin frowned. He was waiting for a trick. "There remains one more debt. A moral one." Everything inside Emily turned cold at those words and at Morales's threatening stare. "What kind of apology do you want from me personally?" she forced out, trying with all her strength to seem calm. "Yes, from you. I want a very personal apology," David answered, hiding a smile beneath a cruel-looking grimace. "Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We'll sit like civilized people, just you and me, and forget everything. Do you agree?" David studied Emily as if trying to understand what she felt, as if playing with her like a cat with a mouse. At the same time, Emily thought feverishly, remembering the photographs of Megan and Peter, whom she might put in danger by refusing. Griffin stood and clenched his fists, but Emily stopped him with a look, because strength was not on their side. "All right, I'll come," she said firmly, giving David a hard stare. "Send me the address and time. You know my number. I'll wait." With those words, Emily stood and left the cafe without saying goodbye. Griffin followed her. Emily was shaking badly, and tears rose in her eyes. Griffin grabbed her by the shoulders and shouted, "Are you out of your mind? Why? It's a trap." "I was thinking about Peter. The little boy and his mother are in danger," Emily said quietly. "Besides, I have a plan too." "What kind of plan could you have?" "That, Mr. Griffin, is a secret. You've done your part. Now it's my turn." The next day, Emily stood ringing the doorbell of David Morales's luxurious house, located at the edge of a forest preserve. Birds sang behind her, and the pine woods murmured in the wind. None of it calmed Emily, though she usually loved being in nature. This time she dressed simply: jeans, a sweater, comfortable boots, and minimal makeup. In her purse lay a voice recorder that was already turned on. She kept pressing the doorbell button, lost in thought about what Gregory had brought her to. Could she, a simple librarian, ever have imagined she would visit a dangerous crime boss, even a former one? David opened the door himself and silently removed her finger from the bell, which Emily had been pressing mechanically the entire time. "Forgive me, Emily, but my cats are already deaf and hiding in the corners from all that ringing," he said with a smirk. She froze at the sight of David in house clothes and soft slippers. The mention of cats threw her off even more. "How many cats do you have?" Emily asked, not knowing what else one could discuss with a crime boss, even a retired one. 5. 1 male and 4 females. David answered easily. "Come in. Why are you standing there like a stranger?" Emily shivered and crossed the threshold of the house she had been so afraid to enter. The house was large but warm and cozy. Everywhere one could feel a woman's touch. David caught the surprised look on his guest's face. "My wife, Olivia, died 6 years ago in childbirth," he said quietly. "Neither she nor the baby girl survived. Everything has stayed the way she left it. Sit down. I set the table. Do you eat everything?" Emily nodded. She was stunned and embarrassed because she had expected nasty advances, not heartfelt confessions. Suddenly, a cat emerged from beneath the table, with thick gray fur marked by black patterns, a flat little face, and large round amber eyes. The cat sat a short distance away and studied Emily. "Hello, how are you?" Emily leaned down and offered the cat her hand. "Don't be afraid. My name is Emily." The cat meowed, came closer, sniffed her hand, and immediately jumped onto Emily's lap. Morales stared and said, "Well, I'll be damned. She's mean. She bites and scratches my guys, so they're afraid to come into the room. But she accepted you. What's her name?" Emily stroked the cat's back while the animal purred like a small tractor. "Sasha. She belonged to my late wife, Olivia," David explained. "She's old now." When the ambulance took Olivia to the hospital, Sasha ran after it until she ran out of strength, like a dog. She was pregnant then. Olivia was waiting for those kittens and wanted to give them to friends. She didn't get the chance. And where are the kittens? They all live with me. David smiled. All 4 of them. I couldn't give them away while I was grieving my wife and daughter. Watch this. David picked up a little bag of cat treats, and immediately, as if at a whistle, they appeared. First came an orange tomcat, followed by 3 female cats. Simon, meet Emily. David stroked the tomcat between the ears, and the cat sat near him, looking curiously at the guest. Well, would you look at that? Emily said in surprise. My husband wouldn't let me get a cat. He was afraid for his cacti, and here you have 5 at once. A dream. Soon all 5 fluffy creatures were sitting near Emily on the couch. Yes, cats really do prefer a woman's hand. I'm even jealous. David laughed, though his laughter was sad. Emily did not miss it. She was seeing this man from a completely different side. Come on, let's eat. I worked hard. Dinner was delicious and made with heart. Grilled meat, vegetables, herbs. The entire atmosphere encouraged friendly conversation. Soon Emily knew almost everything about the owner of the house. How he grew up with his grandmother, how hard it was for him to get on his feet. How difficult and wrong his life had been until he met Olivia. She listened, ate, enjoyed tea, exotic fruit, and sweet pastries, nodding and encouraging the storyteller. They did not notice how several hours passed. Darkness had fallen outside when Emily made it clear to David that it was time for her to go. He immediately grew sad and deflated. You probably thought yesterday that I expected something more from you, he asked, helping her put on her jacket. Of course, Emily laughed. That was a test. And you passed. He looked down at the cats following her. Look, my cats are seeing you off. Tell them you'll come again. David waited for her answer. I'll come, Emily said with a smile, petting Sasha and Simon, who rubbed against her legs from both sides. Did you hear that? She'll come, David exclaimed happily, picking up his car keys. Come on, I'll drive you home. The whole way to Emily's place, they chatted about this and that. It felt so easy that Emily thought she had known this stern-looking man for a long time. The next day, David appeared with an enormous bouquet of red roses. It was almost laughably obvious, but so sweet and pleasant that Emily was overwhelmed with emotion. It had been a long time since anyone had courted her like that, and at last, in her home, a man was cooking. Dig in, Morales exclaimed, taking off his apron and pulling out a chair for Emily. Try my signature recipe. On the table stood a large skillet of seared meat in a special sauce, the recipe for which David's mother had once given him. The aroma was so appetizing that Emily's mouth watered. She grabbed a fork and began eating straight from the skillet. This is incredible. I can't stop. The meat melts in my mouth. How did you do this? My pork chops always come out like shoe leather, Emily admitted, making David laugh. Every self-respecting man should know how to cook meat, he observed philosophically. Marry me, and I swear I'll cook for you every day. At such an unexpected proposal, Emily actually choked. David had to pat her on the back and hand her a glass of water. Was that a joke? Emily stared at him and dropped into a chair. We've known each other only a few days, so what? David answered. I recognized my woman right away. You don't like me at all, do you? Emily smiled when she saw the man she had once feared turn red. I do like you, she said honestly, but that's not a reason to jump into marriage. I buried my husband recently. I need to wait through the mourning period, and you and I could stand to get used to each other. David suddenly shouted with joy, hugged Emily, and spun her around the room. So you like me, you say? Then I'll wait. That evening, when the streetlights came on, David left Emily's apartment and headed toward his car. On the way, he looked back. She stood at the window, her arms wrapped around her shoulders, watching him go. Morales smiled and waved. He understood that Emily did not need his status or his money. She needed only a man who would love and respect her. I'll wait, he said, and got into the car. A year flew by unnoticed. Emily dated David and planned the wedding. Megan and Peter lacked nothing. Morales found Megan a job and enrolled Peter in a good preschool. He gave Griffin a Swiss watch for his honesty and for helping Emily when she had needed it so badly. Leo Griffin was happy and proud to become part of their close-knit circle, no longer feeling as lonely as he had before. In addition, he worked as the manager of that same Just For You cafe, which David bought for Emily. Now Emily brewed delicious coffee for customers herself, baked pies, and even learned to make empanadas for David's sake. Her pastries were in demand, and the cafe quickly became popular. It was no longer empty as it had once been. In the evenings, long lines formed outside her cafe to listen to live jazz performed by a tiny chamber trio of 3 retired musicians who had once shone at a fashionable restaurant. On one such cozy evening, Emily sat at her favorite table by the window, sorting papers and glancing at the door. David was supposed to arrive soon so they could discuss wedding preparations. Mrs. Wilson, a young waitress, approached the owner. "Some older gentleman is asking for you." "What for?" Emily asked in surprise. "He says it's personal." The girl shrugged. "Invite him over here." Emily grew curious. A minute later, a gray-haired, respectable old man in an expensive coat approached her, leaning on a cane. His face seemed vaguely familiar to Emily, but she could not remember where she had seen it. "Hello. Are you Emily Wilson, widow of Gregory Wilson?" he asked. "Yes. Please sit down." Emily pointed to the chair across from her. "Tea? Coffee, maybe?" The old man shook his head and said, "I'm Greg's father. My name is Peter Wilson." Emily was stunned by those words and sat silent, unable to find a reply. Gregory's father continued, "I can see you're surprised. My son probably never told you anything about me. And it's no wonder, because we had a terrible falling out. I left him and his mother. I ran overseas with a rich widow, chasing happiness. I married her, but I never found happiness." "He told me you were dead," Emily gasped. "My God, and now he is dead himself, and we never saw each other again. I never asked him for forgiveness. I learned about his death 2 weeks ago. I typed his name into the internet and nearly fainted. How did he die? I want to visit his grave and ask forgiveness. Will you help me?" Emily took the old man's hand. He was trembling. She felt boundless pity for him. Parents should not have to lose their children, even children like Gregory. "Of course I'll help. And you can stay with me, or I can book you a hotel room," she offered. "What are you saying, dear girl?" Those words suddenly made Emily's heart grow warm. "I'm so rich now that I could buy that hotel for you. Do you want it?" Peter Wilson looked at her directly, and Emily understood that he was not joking. "No, I don't need a hotel. Just be my guest," Emily said softly. "Tell me about my son," the old man asked. They talked for about 2 hours. Peter Wilson told her about his life, about his second family, in which no children had ever been born, and about how endlessly he regretted not reconciling with his son while he was alive. He cried, and tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks. Emily listened and did not know how to tell him that his son had been a bad man, so she did not. This old man, worn out by a lonely life, was not guilty of what Gregory had become. "You know, Mr. Wilson, you do have a grandson," Emily suddenly said. "But I thought you and Gregory had no children. Acquaintances told me so," the old man said, astonished, his face lengthening at the news. "He isn't my child. He's the son of Gregory and Megan, his common-law wife," Emily explained. At that news, Peter Wilson nearly fell off his chair. "How is that? Were you divorced?" "No, it's a tangled story, and I'll tell you someday." Emily smiled and discovered with surprise that she was no longer angry at Gregory. Suddenly, David approached their table with quick steps and gave a jealous, sideways glance at the wealthy old man, whose hand Emily was holding while she smiled. "Emily, who is this?" David asked sternly. "Meet Peter Wilson." Emily looked at David lovingly. "And this is David, my future husband." When Morales learned that the old man sitting before him was Gregory's father, he bowed respectfully and shook his dry hand. "I invite you to our wedding. Will you come?" he asked. "I missed my son's wedding, but I will certainly come to yours, my dear," the old man said, tearing up. "Then be my stand-in, father," Emily whispered and suddenly began to cry. Then, so the men would not feel sorry for her, she said to David, "Sweetheart, take Peter Wilson to meet his grandson." "So you told him everything?" David asked. "Well, let's say not everything. Only about little Peter," she explained. David nodded in understanding, and Peter Wilson suddenly exclaimed, "So my grandson is named Peter, like me. That means my son forgave me. He forgave me." The wedding of Emily and David was grand. So many guests were invited that it seemed half the city was celebrating in the enormous ballroom of an upscale hotel. Emily understood that she was finally truly happy, because under her heart beat one more tiny, long-awaited heart, a real miracle. "What are you thinking about?" Griffin sat down beside her. About life, Mr. Griffin. About how only a year ago I was standing in a cemetery, and now I'm sitting at my own wedding, she said with a smile. Yes, life is many things. Griffin kissed the bride on the forehead like a father. I wish you happiness, Emily. The wedding thundered through the city for 3 more days. That was how David showed how happy he was. And a week later, white carnations appeared on Gregory's grave. Emily brought them because she had forgiven him. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done in Emily's place? With betrayal behind you, danger in front of you, and innocent people caught in the middle. Share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply. If this story touched you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next story.